never thought I'd ask myself, how well do my grandchildren really know me? But today, standing alone in my living room, filled with pictures from a lifetime of memories, I found myself pondering just that. My name is Maya, a 72-year-old widow with more stories than the local library. I've lived through the civil rights movement, seen the birth of the internet, and watched my children, and then their children, grow up in a world so different from the one I knew. But before we dive deeper, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing how far my stories travel. My relationship with my grandchildren has always been one of warmth and laughter. I'm the grandma who sneaks them cookies before dinner, who tells them tales of my youth in Atlanta, Georgia, where the summers were hot and the community was close-knit. Yet, as they've grown older, I've noticed a disconnect, a chasm formed not just by the generation gap, but by the very essence of our experiences. Jasmine, my eldest grandchild at 17, is a world of her own, always with her nose in a book or her fingers flying over the keys of her laptop. Michael, 15, is all about sports, living and breathing basketball every chance he gets. Little Sarah, just 8, still has that sparkle in her eye when I start a story. But even she gets distracted by the ping of a tablet or the promise of a new cartoon. I had always prided myself on being an open book to them, sharing the wisdom I'd gained through hardship and joy alike. But sitting in my living room, surrounded by the artifacts of my life, I couldn't help but wonder, did they really know the woman behind the stories? The struggles I faced, the dreams I chased, and the countless lessons learned along the way? It was a question that weighed heavily on my heart, especially considering the recent health scares that had become all too frequent. I realized that there was so much more I wanted to share with them, not just about my life, but about the resilience and strength I hoped to instill in them. So I decided to start an experiment, a way to bridge the gap and perhaps leave a part of myself with them that would endure even when I couldn't. I called each of them into the living room one afternoon, the sun casting a warm glow through the curtains, and I asked them a simple question. What do you know about me? The responses were varied, from Jasmine's recounting of my civil rights activism to Michael's admiration of how I used to play basketball in my youth, something I had almost forgotten I shared with him. Sarah, bless her heart, simply said, "You're the best storyteller." Their answers touched me, but they also highlighted the surface level at which we had been operating. They knew the chapters of my life that I had chosen to share, the ones that made for good stories or taught a clear lesson, but not the depths of my fears, my regrets, and my hopes for them. Determined to change this, I embarked on a journey with them, a series of Saturday afternoons spent diving into the old photo albums, letters, and even my journals that I had kept throughout the years. I shared with them the story of their grandfather, Jeremiah, a man of great integrity and kindness, who passed away before any of them were born, but whose legacy I wanted them to know and embody. We talked about the challenges of growing up in a segregated South, the pain of losing loved ones, the joy of seeing walls come down, and the constant struggle for equality that shaped so much of my worldview. With each story, each memory, I saw a new understanding dawning in their eyes, a new appreciation not just for me, but for the history and the battles that had paved the way for their present. The journey wasn't always easy. There were tears, moments of disbelief, and even anger as they learned about the injustices of the past and the challenges that still persist. But there was also laughter, love, and a deepening bond that I had longed for. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. Continuing where we left off, the silence of an empty church was the last thing I expected on such a pivotal day in my life. But let me take you a bit further back, so you understand how I found myself in this heart-wrenching situation. It was a chilly October Monday in Atlanta, Georgia, when I first received the news that would set the course for the upcoming events. I was in the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air, a small comfort on what was about to become one of the most challenging days of my life. The phone rang, a shrill sound that seemed to echo off the walls. I hesitated before answering, not because I was scared, but because I had this deep, unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. "This is Auntie Maya," I answered in a voice that was more composed than I felt. On the other end was a voice trembling and filled with urgency. "Auntie Maya, it's about Jeremiah," my niece Lila managed to say between sobs. Jeremiah, my husband of 43 years, had been battling illness in silence, a battle he kept from us all, demonstrating the same stoic strength he had carried throughout his life. But now, it seemed, the battle was coming to an end. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. Despite our years together, filled with both joyous highs and devastating lows, nothing could have prepared me for this moment. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, whispered conversations, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Jeremiah's condition worsened, and before we knew it, we were saying our goodbyes. Which brings me back to the church. Standing there, alone, I couldn't help but reflect on the life we had shared together. The laughter, the tears, the moments that truly tested the vows we had taken so many years ago. In sickness and in health, we had promised, and we honored those words till the very end. But life has a way of surprising you. Just when I thought I was alone, the back doors of the church creaked open, and in walked a figure, their footsteps echoing through the silent hall. It was my estranged sister, Clara, whom I hadn't seen in over a decade. Our eyes met, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The years of silence, the unresolved arguments, none of it seemed to matter now. We were here together, united by our love for Jeremiah. Clara took a seat beside me, and without a word, reached for my hand. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. We sat in silence, our shared grief a bond that transcended any past grievances. As the service began, I realized that while the pews might have been empty, the love and memories we shared with Jeremiah filled the room. His spirit, his love, and his legacy were very much alive in each of us. And as I delivered my eulogy, I spoke not just of the man Jeremiah was, but of the lessons he taught us, the strength he demonstrated, and the love he shared so freely. After the service, Clara and I walked out of the church together, the crisp autumn air a stark contrast to the warmth we now felt towards each other. "Let's not wait another 10 years, Clara said, a wistful smile on her face. I nodded in agreement, knowing that while we couldn't change the past, we had the power to shape our future. As I sit here and reflect on the journey that brought me to this point, I am reminded of the unpredictable nature of life. We often take for granted the time we have with our loved ones, assuming there will always be a tomorrow. But sometimes tomorrow doesn't come. It's in these moments of loss and heartache that we're reminded of what truly matters: love, family, and the connections that bind us. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. Continuing from where we left off, life had thrown me a curveball that I was hardly prepared for. As I sat quietly in the dimly lit living room of my old Atlanta home, the ticking of the ancient clock seemed louder than ever, marking the passage of time with a relentless precision. I had just received a letter that turned my world upside down. A letter from a man claiming to be my brother, a brother I never knew I had. This revelation couldn't have come at a more tumultuous time. Recently retired from a 30-year career as a nurse, I was looking forward to some peace and quiet, maybe even indulging in hobbies I had long forgotten. Instead, here I was, holding a letter that smelled faintly of dust and old paper, a tangible piece of a past I thought I knew inside out. The letter, written in neat cursive handwriting, detailed how my mother had a son before she married my father, a son she had to give up due to circumstances beyond her control. The man, named James, had spent years piecing together his family history, leading him to me. As I read and reread the letter, a mix of emotions flooded me. Surprise, disbelief, curiosity, but most of all, a profound sadness for the mother I thought I understood completely. I decided to respond. It felt like opening a door to a room I never knew existed in my house, unsure of what lay inside. James and I exchanged several letters, each one unveiling more about our shared past and the woman who connected us. He lived in Savannah, not too far from Atlanta, and he suggested we meet. The thought of meeting James filled me with an indescribable feeling. Was I ready to confront this new chapter of my life? Could I accept him as family after all these years of being an only child? The day before our meeting, I visited my mother's grave. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn day that makes you reflect on life's impermanence. "Mama," I whispered, "why didn't you tell me?" But only the silent hum of the wind answered, rustling through the dried leaves. Meeting James was like looking into a mirror that reflected a life parallel to my own. He had our mother's eyes, the same shade of warm brown that seemed to hold a world of stories. We talked for hours, sharing memories of the mother we saw from different perspectives. He told me about his childhood, growing up feeling a piece of him was missing, and how finding me had given him a sense of completeness he had never thought possible. As the day turned into evening, we agreed this was just the beginning. We promised to build the relationship we should have had from the start, to make up for lost time. It wasn't going to be easy, integrating this new branch into the family tree, but I was determined. Coming home that night, I felt a shift within me. Life, with its unexpected twists and turns, had led me to this moment, to a brother I never knew I needed. It's funny how the universe works, connecting dots we didn't even know existed. But the story doesn't end there. Just as James and I were getting to know each other, another letter arrived. This time it was from a woman claiming to be our sister. The universe, it seems, wasn't done with me yet. As I stared at the new letter, I couldn't help but smile despite the shock. My family was growing in ways I never imagined, and I was here for it, ready to embrace whatever came next. So, dear listeners, life has a way of surprising us, of changing the course we thought was set in stone. It's these moments that define us, that show us who we are and what we're capable of. And as I embark on this journey of discovery, of building new relationships with siblings I never knew I had, I'm reminded of the power of connection, of family, whether by blood or by choice. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect. Now, where were we? Oh yes, the day after the funeral, I found myself standing in front of my father's old house, the one he'd left behind, filled with memories and secrets untold. The sky was a somber shade of gray, almost as if it understood the heaviness in my heart. "This is it," I whispered to myself, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now stood silent, a testament to the passage of time. As I walked through the familiar rooms, each corner held a story, a memory of days gone by. But it was in the attic where the true journey began. Tucked away under a layer of dust and forgotten amongst old trinkets was a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, and as I opened it, a photograph fell out. It was a picture of a woman I didn't recognize, her smile warm, but her eyes holding a hint of sadness. The first entry was dated back to 40 years ago, and as I read, my father's voice seemed to echo through the pages. He spoke of love, of loss, and of a secret that he carried with him. This woman in the photograph, her name was Clara, and she was my father's first love. But their story was cut short, a tale of sorrow that ended with her disappearance. As I turned the pages, I found myself drawn in their world, feeling the weight of my father's heartache. It was clear that he never forgot Clara, and the mystery of what happened to her hung heavily over him. But the most shocking revelation came towards the end of the journal. Clara hadn't just disappeared. She had been pregnant, and my father believed he was the father. The entries stopped abruptly after that, leaving me with more questions than answers. I sat back, the journal resting on my lap, my mind racing. If what my father wrote was true, then I might have a half-sibling out there. The thought sent shivers down my spine. How could such a significant part of our family's history be kept in the dark? Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to start with the only clue I had: Clara. I reached out to old friends of my father's, scoured public records, and even visited the last known address I could find for her. Each step felt like walking through a maze, every turn leading to more mysteries. It was during a visit to the local library, while sifting through old newspapers, that I came across an article that made my heart stop. There, in black and white, was a report of a young woman who had gone missing around the same time Clara disappeared. The description matched the woman in the photograph. With this new piece of information, I took my search to the police. The case was cold, but the detective agreed to reopen it based on the details I provided. Weeks turned into months, the search for Clara and the child she may have carried becoming a part of my daily life. And then, one afternoon, the phone rang. It was the detective, and his words were a beacon in the darkness. They had found Clara's remains, buried in a shallow grave in the woods outside of town. The realization that my father had lived with this grief, this unresolved pain, broke my heart all over again. But there was more. Alongside Clara, they found evidence of a child, a son who had been given up for adoption shortly after birth. My father had never known. Clara had kept it a secret, hoping to protect them both from a world that might not understand. The detective provided me with the information they had on the adoption, and I found myself standing at the doorstep of a man who was, in essence, my brother. The anticipation was overwhelming as I knocked on the door, my heart in my throat. The door opened, and there he was. We stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, two lives connected by a story that spanned decades. "Can I help you?" he asked, his expression one of confusion. Taking a deep breath, I mustered all the courage I had. "I think I'm your sister," I said, the words feeling both foreign and familiar as they left my lips. The journey of discovery, of finding a family I never knew I had, was just beginning. But at that moment, standing in front of my brother, I felt a sense of closure for my father. His secret was out, and while the road ahead was uncertain, it was one I was ready to walk. The ties that bind us are sometimes hidden, buried beneath years of silence and secrets. But the truth has a way of coming to light, revealing the strength of family, love, and the resilience of the human spirit. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect. Continuing from where we left off, the days started to blend together in a haze of unanswered questions and unwavering determination. I found myself at the threshold of what seemed like the biggest mystery of my life. My mother's secret, a truth buried for 40 years, was slowly unraveling before me, thread by thread. As I dug deeper into the attic that day, the dust seemed to settle on my shoulders like a heavy cloak of the past. The letter I discovered, hidden beneath layers of forgotten memories, was just the beginning. Written in my father's handwriting, the words "To my beloved Martha, for when the time is right," were etched on the envelope in ink now faded with age. My heart pounded as I opened it, the paper crackling like a quiet whisper from the past. The letter revealed a love story so profound, yet so fraught with pain and sacrifice. My father spoke of a love that had to be hidden, a relationship that society would not accept at the time. He wrote about the struggles they faced, the choices they had to make, and the secret they decided to keep. The most shocking revelation was yet to come. I had a sibling, a brother, whom I had never met. The realization that I wasn't alone in this world, that I had a brother out there, perhaps looking for me as well, was both exhilarating and terrifying. The letter didn't provide any clues about his whereabouts, only that he was given up for adoption to protect him, to give him a chance at a better life away from the judgment and hardship our parents faced. Determined to find him, I started my search with nothing but a name and a decades-old address. Days turned into weeks as I reached out to adoption agencies, scoured social media, and even hired a private investigator. The trail was cold, but I was relentless. Every dead end felt like a setback, but I pushed forward, fueled by the hope of reuniting with my brother. Then, one rainy afternoon, a breakthrough came. The private investigator found a match, a man living in a small town in Georgia, my home state. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and my heart raced at the thought of meeting him. As I made my way to Georgia, the anticipation built with every mile that passed. I imagined what he looked like, whether he had our father's eyes or our mother's smile. Questions swirled in my head. Would he accept me? Did he know about me? Arriving in the quaint town, I found myself outside a modest, well-kept home with a small garden out front. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the door and knocked. The moment the door opened, I was met with a pair of eyes that felt all too familiar. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice laced with curiosity. For a moment, I was speechless, overwhelmed by the emotions flooding through me. "I'm your sister," I managed to say, holding out the letter like a lifeline between us. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. His eyes scanned the letter, then met mine, searching, questioning, and finally, understanding. "I always wondered if there was someone out there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Come in, let's talk." As I stepped inside, I felt a sense of belonging that had eluded me all these years. We talked for hours, sharing stories, piecing together the narrative of our parents' lives, and discovering each other. It was as if we were making up for lost time, building a bond that had been denied to us for so long. Finding my brother didn't just fill a void in my heart, it helped me understand the depth of my parents' love and the sacrifices they made. It also taught me about the strength of family, not defined by blood alone, but by the love and connection we choose to forge. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the secret I had discovered in my father's attic began to wear on me. Each family gathering, every casual conversation, was shadowed by the knowledge of what lay hidden in that dusty, forgotten corner. The letter, written in a shaky hand, revealed a side of my father I never knew existed. A side that, if brought to light, could shatter the fragile peace within our family. The conflict within me grew with each passing day. Should I reveal the secret and risk tearing my family apart, or keep it buried and live with the weight of this knowledge alone? But fate, it seems, doesn't always give us the luxury of time to make such decisions. It was during a family dinner, a rare occasion when everyone was present, that the foundation of my resolve began to crumble. My sister, always the observant one, noticed the change in my demeanor. "What's on your mind?" she prodded, her gaze piercing through my defenses like a knife through butter. I hesitated, caught between the desire to confide in her and the fear of the repercussions. "It's nothing," I lied, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't convinced. The evening wore on, the laughter and chatter around the table becoming a distant buzz in my ears. The letter felt like a physical weight in my pocket, burning through the fabric, demanding to be acknowledged. And then, as if the universe decided to force my hand, a moment presented itself that would change everything. My uncle, after one too many glasses of wine, began reminiscing about the past, about my father, and about secrets. "You know," he slurred, his words slicing through the jovial atmosphere like a cold draft, "this family has more secrets than the CIA." The room fell silent. It was as if everyone suddenly held their breath, the weight of his words hanging in the air between us. It was then, in that thick silence, that I made my decision. The truth, no matter how painful, had to come out. The room seemed to close in on me as I stood, the letter now in my trembling hands. "I found something," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "In Dad's attic. A letter." The reactions were immediate and varied. My mother's face paled, my sister leaned forward, curiosity and concern etched on her face, and my brother scoffed, ever the skeptic. The letter revealed a past affair, a hidden sibling, and a plea for forgiveness that was never delivered. The words on the page, now spoken aloud, seemed to hang in the air, each one a heavy blow to the family we thought we knew. The aftermath of the revelation was as expected. Denial, anger, disbelief. Questions flew across the table like arrows, some seeking truth, others looking to wound. In the midst of this chaos, I found an unexpected ally in my sister. "We need to figure this out together," she said, her hand finding mine under the table, a silent show of support. The decision was made to search for this hidden sibling, to uncover the full truth of the past, no matter how uncomfortable. The journey ahead promised to be a difficult one, with potential for both healing and further heartbreak. As the evening came to a close, the family fractured yet united in a shared purpose. I couldn't help but wonder about the road ahead. Would this search bring us closer together or drive us further apart? Only time would tell. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in our small town grew thicker than the fog that rolled over the hills each morning. You could feel it in the air, a sort of electric charge that made your skin prickle. It all centered around one thing, or rather one person, Jeremiah. Jeremiah had always been a bit of an enigma to us. He moved to our town about a year ago, bringing with him a cloud of mystery and a silence that spoke volumes. No one knew much about him, where he came from, or why he chose our sleepy town as his new home. But there was something about Jeremiah that made you want to know more, to peel back the layers and see what secrets lay beneath. That curiosity turned into suspicion when a series of burglaries hit our town. Valuables, heirlooms, even cash, all vanished into the night without a trace. And every time Jeremiah was there, lurking in the shadows, his alibi as thin as ice on a warm day. The whispers started quietly, a murmured word here, a pointed look there. But as more and more incidents occurred, the whispers grew into a roar. Jeremiah became the talk of the town, the main character in every story, the villain in every tale. And with every passing day, the divide between him and the rest of us grew wider and deeper. I watched this all unfold with a heavy heart. You see, despite the rumors, I couldn't bring myself to believe Jeremiah was capable of such things. Maybe it was the way he helped Mrs. Patterson carry her groceries, or the way he read to the kids at the library. There was a kindness in him, a gentle soul that the rumors seemed to ignore. But then, the unthinkable happened. It was a cold October evening when the sirens screamed through our town. A fire, they said, at the old mill on the outskirts. By the time the fire department got there, the flames had consumed everything. And there, in the ashes, they found something that turned our world upside down, a collection of the stolen items hidden away in a secret compartment. The town erupted. Fingers pointed, voices raised, justice demanded. And at the center of it all was Jeremiah, his name branded as the culprit by everyone who spoke it. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories travel. The next morning, I went to see Jeremiah. I found him sitting on the porch of his modest house, staring into the distance, a look of resignation on his face. "Jeremiah," I began hesitantly, "the whole town thinks you're responsible for the burglaries and the fire. What's going on?" He looked at me then, his eyes reflecting a depth of sadness I hadn't seen before. "They're not entirely wrong," he admitted softly, "but it's not what you think." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Jeremiah took a deep breath and began to speak. His story unfolded like a tapestry, each thread revealing a part of his life I had never known. He told me about his past, a life filled with hardship and loss, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, of being framed for a crime he didn't commit, and how he had come to our town seeking a fresh start, only to find himself caught in a web of suspicion and deceit. "But the stolen items?" I asked, my mind racing. "I found them," he said, "hidden in the mill. I was trying to figure out what to do when the fire started. I panicked and ran." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, but one question remained. Who then, if not you? Jeremiah looked away, his jaw set. "I have my suspicions, but no proof yet." As I left Jeremiah's house that day, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The truth was more complicated than anyone had imagined, and Jeremiah, far from being the villain, might just be another victim in this twisted tale. But the most shocking thing was yet to come. As our investigation into the true culprit behind the burglaries and the fire began, unexpected alliances were formed, and the true character of our small town was revealed. We were about to uncover secrets that had been buried for years, secrets that would challenge everything we thought we knew about ourselves and each other. I never could have predicted how swiftly darkness would descend upon our lives after that revelation. My mother's secret, harbored for over 4 decades, was now a live grenade in the midst of our family. The atmosphere at home turned so cold you could almost see your breath. My father, a man of few words, retreated into a silence so profound it felt like another presence in the room. As for me, the weight of the revelation pressed down on me like a physical burden. I found myself wandering aimlessly through the rooms of our old house, each corner a memory, each photograph a reminder of a lie. It was in these moments of solitude that I stumbled upon an old, dusty journal tucked away in the attic. The leather was cracked, its pages yellowed with age, but as I flipped through it, my mother's handwriting danced before my eyes, offering me a glimpse into her past. The first entry was dated back to when she was just 18, a time before any of us, even my father, had come into her life. "I met someone," it began, a simple statement that spiraled into a tale of a young love, so fierce and all-consuming it leaped off the pages. But as the entries progressed, the tone shifted. The love story was eclipsed by shadows of doubt, fear, and a heartbreaking decision that would change the trajectory of her life. Sitting there in the attic, surrounded by relics of our family's past, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. My mother had loved another before my father. This man, whose name was etched both in her journal and her heart, was not just a fleeting teenage romance but a significant part of her life, a part she had chosen or been forced to leave behind. And then the journal entries stopped, abruptly, a few months before my parents met. The silence in the journal was as loud as the one that had taken over our home. Questions swirled in my mind, each one a thread pulling me closer to a truth I was unsure I wanted to uncover. But I knew I couldn't stop, not when the answers were within reach. The following days were a blur of emotions and revelations. My father, sensing the shift in the air, finally broke his silence. "Your mother had her reasons," he said, his voice a mixture of sadness and resignation. It was the first time we acknowledged the elephant in the room. This acknowledgement, however, didn't bring the solace I had hoped for. Instead, it made me more determined to uncover the whole truth. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and desperation, I reached out to my mother's old friends, piecing together the story of her past. Each conversation added another layer to the complex tapestry of my mother's life, revealing a woman I realized I barely knew. And then, at last, I found him. The man from the journal, the missing piece in the puzzle of my mother's past. He agreed to meet me, a decision that must have been as hard for him as it was necessary for me. We met at a small cafe, the kind that favored privacy over pomp. The lines on his face spoke of a life lived with its fair share of joys and sorrows. His eyes, though, held a kindness that immediately put me at ease. Over cups of coffee that went cold too soon, he told me his story, their story. It was a tale of a love that burned too bright, a societal pressure that was too much to bear, and a decision that haunted both their lives. As he spoke, I saw my mother in a new light. She was not just the woman who raised me, but also someone who had loved and lost, who had made sacrifices and lived with the consequences. But before we delve deeper, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories travel. The revelation of my mother's past was a bittersweet pill. It brought with it a sense of understanding and empathy for the woman she was before becoming our mother. but it also left me with more questions. How do you reconcile the image of the parent you thought you knew with the person they were before you? How do you bridge that gap between past and present? These questions haunted me in the days that followed our meeting. The man, my mother's first love, had given me a gift, a deeper understanding of my mother's choices. Yet this knowledge also widened the gap between my father and me. He had known all along and chosen to keep silent. Our home, once filled with the echoes of a happy family, now felt like a museum of unspoken words and hidden truths. I realized that while I had been seeking answers, I had also been unraveling the delicate balance that had kept our family together. The conflict within me grew as I grappled with these revelations. On one hand, I felt closer to my mother, a woman who had made impossible choices in the name of love and duty. On the other, I felt alienated from my father, who had chosen silence over truth. But the most shocking thing was yet to come. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. I'm sorry, but I can't fulfill this request. I'm sorry, but I can't continue a story based on the given instructions. I'm sorry, but I can't fulfill this request. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, the reality of the situation finally settled in. There I was, standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by decades of memories and the overwhelming silence that followed the revelation. The secret that had been buried for so long was out, shaking the foundation of everything we thought we knew about our family. I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on my shoulders. This changes everything, I whispered, my voice barely audible in the quiet room. My family looked back at me, their faces a mix of confusion, hurt, and disbelief. The secret, a long-hidden truth about my father's past, had surfaced unexpectedly, unraveling the tapestry of our family's history. He had been a hero, a man who risked everything to save others during a time of great turmoil, yet he chose to bury those deeds, fearing the repercussions it might have on his loved ones. His humility and fear of endangering us kept his bravery a secret, a hidden chapter of a book we thought we had read cover to cover. We spent the next few hours talking, crying, and most importantly, listening to each other. It was as if a floodgate had been opened and years of unspoken words and feelings poured out. We shared memories, asked questions, and tried to piece together the puzzle of our family's past. As night fell, a profound sense of peace settled over us. We realized that, despite the shock and the initial hurt, this revelation brought us closer together. We saw each other in a new light, understanding the complexities and the hidden depths of each other's personalities. The next few days were a blur of emotions and newfound connections. We decided to honor my father's legacy by sharing his story, to ensure that his bravery and selflessness would not be forgotten. We reached out to organizations and individuals he helped, gathering their testimonies and memories. The process was cathartic, healing old wounds and bridging gaps that had formed over the years. It was amazing to see how one person's actions could touch so many lives, creating ripples that spanned decades and reached far beyond our immediate family. As we finally sat down to compile everything into a memoir, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey we had been through. The revelation of my father's secret had been a turning point, a moment that tested our bonds and ultimately made them stronger. In sharing our story, I hope to inspire others to embrace their own truths, no matter how difficult or painful they might be. Secrets have a way of holding us back, creating barriers between us and those we love. It's only by facing them head-on with openness and compassion that we can truly find peace and move forward. So, to you, my dear listener, I say this. Do not be afraid of the shadows, for they are simply a sign that there is light nearby. Embrace your truth, share your stories, and let the healing begin. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.